Have you ever hit a point in life where the floor just completely drops out from under you? Maybe it was a sudden layoff, a relationship that unraveled overnight, a health scare, or just a quiet, crushing realization that the life you plan for isn't the life you actually have. You look around and you think, how did I get here? And how on earth am I supposed to rebuild from absolute zero? If you've ever felt that heavy, suffocating weight, you are not alone. Today on Ruth and Remnant, we are diving into a story about what happens when your entire world falls apart, and more importantly, how people who lived thousands of years ago found a way forward when survival felt impossible. To really understand how desperate things get in the story, we have to step out of our modern comfort zones and look at the actual physical and cultural reality of the ancient Near East, specifically the era of the Book of Ruth. We romanticize the ancient world a lot. We see statues and scrolls, and we think about epic tales, but daily survival in this era was far from it. There was no social security safety net. There were no government assistance programs, no severance packages, and no bankruptcy courts. In this agrarian society, your survival was entirely tethered to two things: your family land and your male protectors, your father, your husband, your brother, or your sons. If you lost those, you didn't just lose emotional support, you lost your entire economic engine. You lost your identity, your security, and your voice in society. Picture a family living through an economic depression so severe that their local food supply completely collapses. That is exactly where our story begins. A man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons pack up everything and leave their hometown of Bethlehem, which literally translates to house of bread, because there is literally no bread left. They cross the border into the country of Moab, seeking asylum just to survive. But things go from bad to worse. Elimelech dies. Naomi is left in a foreign land as a widow with two young sons. Those sons grow up, marry local Moabite women named Ruth and Orpha, and then, in an unimaginable tragedy, both sons die too. Now, imagine Naomi's reality. She is an aging, destitute immigrant in a foreign country, stripped of her husband and both of her children. She has zero income, zero legal status, and no safety net. When she finally decides to trek back to Bethlehem empty handed, she looks at the people greeting her at the city gate and says, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. She's not being dramatic. She has lost everything: her family, her home, her livelihood, leaving her utterly broken, displaced, and terrified of what comes next. What I love about this story is that it doesn't sanitize her grief. The Bible does not sugarcoat this moment. We get a glimpse into her real, raw, and messy reality. Naomi is angry, exhausted, and profoundly sad. She has every right to be. Grief has a way of making us feel invisible. If you've ever sat in your car in an empty parking lot, staring blankly through the steering wheel because you're overwhelmed by life changes, you understand Naomi's posture right here. She feels forgotten by God and discarded by life. And then you have Ruth. Ruth is a young Moabite woman who has lost a husband. She isn't obligated to stick around with an aging, destitute foreign mother in law. In fact, standard cultural survival logic dictates that Ruth should stay in her homeland, move back in with her birth family, and try to remarry within her own culture. Instead, Ruth looks at Naomi, who has nothing to offer her, and speaks one of the most fiercely loyal declarations in human history. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. That is so powerful. Think about the sheer courage packed into that sentence. Ruth is stepping into a totally unknown, high risk future. She's choosing to walk hand in hand with grief into a foreign country where she will likely face cultural, prejudice, economic hardship, and total social isolation. They arrive back in Bethlehem right at the beginning of the barley harvest. They have hit rock bottom. They have no food in the pantry. But instead of sitting paralyzed by despair, Ruth wakes up at dawn and says to Naomi, "Let me go out to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone I find in whose eyes I may find favor." This wasn't a glamorous job. Gleaning was the ancient equivalent of dumpster diving or working the absolute lowest tier job just to scrape together enough food for dinner that evening. It was exhausting, backbreaking, physical labor under the hot sun. But Ruth humbles herself and starts working in the field. So, what does an ancient widow gleaning barley in a dusty field have to do with your life right now? Everything. Because most of us at some point face moments where our world falls apart. Maybe you're navigating an overwhelming career pivot because your industry is shifting. Maybe you're dealing with the financial anxiety of inflation, job insecurity, or mounting debt. Maybe burnout has left you feeling like an empty shell of who you used to be, wondering how you're going to rebuild trust or momentum in your life. When we hit those moments, we usually fall into one of two traps. One is the Naomi trap. We let bitterness take root, convincing ourselves that because things went wrong, our story is over and God has checked out. And two is the paralysis trap. We get so overwhelmed by how big the problem is that we hesitate to take the small, uncomfortable steps required to start over. Ruth's story gives us a blueprint for everyday faith when life falls apart. We learn that faith often looks like showing up for the small, ordinary next step. Ruth did not have a multi-year master plan. She did not know how her entire life was going to work out. She just knew she had to eat that day. So she went out to the field and started picking up scraps. When your world is falling apart, stop trying to figure out the next 5 years. Just figure out the next 5 minutes. What is one small, faithful, practical thing you can do today? Send the email. Fill out that application. Make that difficult phone call. Ask for help. Take the next step. The story of Ruth is a reminder that God often works through ordinary, hidden moments. There is no parting of the Red Sea. There are no booming voices from the sky. It's just an ordinary woman walking into an ordinary field, working hard, and meeting an ordinary landowner named Boaz, who turns out to be a relative who can protect and provide for her. God quietly orchestrates a comeback behind the scenes while we are stuck in survival mode. If your world feels like it has fallen apart recently, I want you to take a deep breath. It is okay to grieve like Naomi. It is okay to feel the bitterness of broken expectations, but don't stay there. Gather your strength, and courage like Ruth. Take a deep breath and step out into your field. Your story isn't over. Sometimes the place where everything falls apart is actually the soil where a brand new, beautiful chapter begins to take root. If this message resonated with you today, feel free to leave a comment below sharing how you're navigating your own season of rebuilding, or share this video with a friend who might need an extra reminder. We'll leave it there for today. Remember, you are deeply valued, and just like Ruth, every step of faith quietly builds a foundation for what comes next. See you next time.